nice to see you all. And I'm greeting you here from my home in Reykjavik, Iceland. My name is Bergur Ebbi. I'm a comedian, poet, and essayist. And I'm very happy to have been invited to the St. George New York City Book Festival. And I would really like to use the opportunity to thank Larissa Kyzer for inviting me to this and for her translation work with my latest book, and for overall support during the last months, as well as Marianne Newman for organizing the event, and all the people that are behind this event at these strange times, because it's just a great opportunity to be able to speak to people about your work, even though you can't have physical or actual book festivals at this time. I'm going to be speaking to you a little bit, talking about and introducing myself. I hope not too thoroughly, but I wanted to give you a little bit of context. I think it's interesting to be doing this from my home. I think we've been doing meetings like this and conferences like this for many years, but I think something very special has occurred in our culture when we are all participating in events like this and communicating like this. I feel like we're almost floating around in space, talking to each other, like this has both changed our perception of it has changed our perception of time and even space as well. Even though this has been a time of isolation for many here in Iceland, but probably a lot more for those of you who are tuning in from America. And I must say that and people all over want to feel for you there, which have been struck badly by the pandemic in the last weeks, and the people of New York who are probably suffering from much more isolation than we are here. So we should, we are thinking about you in that sense. But in this time of isolation, and even time of increased nationalism, where borders are closing and people are kind of going back to their home bases, in this time when it's like the heads of governments have blown the big dog whistles, and people, the dogs are coming home and hearing it on their special frequency and returning home. We have a lot of Icelandic people even returning from America back to Iceland and starting to speak you feel these old nationalistic values in people kind of brewing up again, even though people have lived for a long time abroad. But even in these times, because as you hear, I'm a little bit skeptical of these values or these nuances coming up in these times, because I am I like to think that I'm a true globalist myself. I'm not too fond of borders in general and limitations of the movement of people. But even though this has been the case in this time of isolation, I also feel a slight rise in global thinking in the way that I am addressing people now, maybe some here in Iceland, but other people around the globe. And I feel like we are also bringing our home more into a global sphere. So even though people are going back to their roots and maybe supporting their governments, I think they are putting their homes and their private lives more into some kind of global stream. And I've been talking much more to people abroad in the past days than I had maybe many months prior. And that leads me to this idea that the events in the past couple of months has really been a manifestation of technology taking over certain parts of our culture, how we communicate. Maybe it's best to use the allegory of that we have all been uploaded to the cloud My daughter, she goes to class every morning at 8:30, and she uses Google Classroom, and she is, of course, studying the same things. So the whole parameters of her classroom now are defined by programming that has taken place by Google and other big American tech companies in the past 10 or 20 years, which have actually put a lot of emphasis into the cloud computing. And this idea that we have been uploaded to the cloud is an idea that I think will stick around for some time, even after these crises are long past. I think we will maybe look back at this time in 2020 as the time that we really took a big quantum leap into the digital world. And the reason I am talking so much about this and maybe connecting that to the current situation is that this has been what I've been thinking about the most in my work in the past years or so. It's been this relationship between humans and the technology, the meat world and the digital world. And I'm actually mostly interested in the intersection itself, or the friction. That's why my latest book is called Screenshot. It's really about the screen itself. And I'm not only using it as some kind of allegory. I think I'm using the screen in my book Screenshot. I think I'm actually just very much thinking about the technical aspect of that there's a screen separating us from everything else, and there's a screen separating us from all the context and everything that lies beyond it in this great cloudy world that is the digital world that we have created. But we are, in our meat and physical essence, still separated from it by this thin layer of ceramic, whatever you can substitute a word for instead of screen, but some physical matter that is two-dimensional and harsh and cold, but also kind of precise and interesting. I will be talking to you about this, and I don't know what order. I promised the organizers here some kind of introduction before I start reading from my new book and Larissa's translation of it. And what I promised to deliver was just some kind of rant. It's very hard maybe to call this a lecture of any sort, but I will be tracking the time a little bit, so I will have some time to read a little bit from the book. But I promised you some more context, because I know a lot of people are just tuning into this, and they can see that it's Iceland night, and I'm talking to you here, but there's nothing really in these surroundings here that show that I'm in Iceland. I wish we had daylight right now, and I could maybe give you a little peek out the window, even though you not even recognize Iceland from that. It's not like we have waterfalls or something just outside this window. I'm in my basement in my home in Reykjavik, and I'm trying to make this a little bit of a formal thing. It's past midnight already, 20 minutes to 1 in the morning, and everybody in the house is asleep, but I dressed up, went down here, and I turned on the lava lamp to make this, to make this kind of slight decadent feel here. But I just turned it on, and as you know, the lava lamp is very old technology, so it's actually dependent on, like, this wax here needs to be heated up by a old school light bulb that heats up the wax, and just starting to get that Austin Powers groove on here. But we're slowly cooking that. Maybe at the end of my chapter we will have some lava lamp action going on here. But otherwise, I'm just here in Reykjavik, Iceland. And that's probably the only thing you know, that this is Iceland night, and I'm an Icelandic writer. I think I'm also introduced here as a essayist, comedian. I do stand-up comedy, and I've been doing that here in Iceland for a little over a decade. But I actually started off in music first. That was my debut in the art scene. And I brought some some things to show you here, because I just took off my old record player. This is a record we made 13 years ago, my band. This is the name of the band, Forlagið, and the album is called Ivan Rocker. And I was very happy to see this because obviously in 2007 this came out on CD originally, but we were so early adapters and hipsters and that we also had it on vinyl in this double cool album in 2007. And I had almost forgotten that we did that, but we were very proud of that. And here we have a motive that I love very much, a press conference. I love this kind of, but you know, this is obviously a fake one here. But that's how I started out, and then in the literary world, I started with poetry. A little later, in 2010, this came out from my dear and trusted publishing house, Forlagið, and this is called Tíminn hitnar liðinn. And I'm just showing this because I love artifacts. I love design of things, and I've been lucky enough to have very good designers work on the covers of these books. This one is done by Alexandra for Forlagið. And the time of wit has passed would be the translation of this. This letter came out after him on Curator, also a volume of poetry by Partus Forlag, Partus Publishing House. And also really like the cover of this. I'm just, you know, bragging about that. And then, again from Málamenning, an essay, which I call Stofuhiti, or room temperature. And here I am threading a little bit more closer to my current examinations, which have to do with our relationship with technology. And room temperature is like a big analogy of because, you know, in so many ways what I'm exploring a lot is both visual representation of our current state, and also I'm just searching for new words to explain the digital culture, really, or information technology. And I feel like in so many ways a term like internet and even connectivity or hyperconnectivity, whatever we would call the internet 2.0 or smartphone internet, 3G, 4G, whatever, I think these are in some ways dated concepts, because I feel like, especially if you think just about the term like internet, it suggests a little bit a two-dimensional form, more of a conventional industrial idea of connection between things. And it really is an analogy and comparison to a physical object, which is the net. And I just feel like so many things in our digital culture today, and I feel like terms like cloud and cloud computing, which have actually been pushed a lot by the big tech companies, are more appropriate to explain the all-around kind of atmosphere that I feel is the real essence of this culture, because it's all around us, and we are not able to escape it anymore, and we cannot really live anymore with the dualism of online life versus real life, or meet the physical world versus the digital one. And so Stofuhiti is actually an analogy for that. It means room temperature. And I use this term because the room temperature is a term, it's almost like a scientific term, but it's also used a lot in baking and with recipes and stuff. And it's not a really, I feel like it's just an interesting term, room temperature, because it's both kind of suggests something that is kind of nice and cozy, like lukewarm kind of, but it's not really a pleasant term. When something is at room temperature, you feel like, okay, it's fine, it's okay, it's without the extremes, but you don't really want to dwell in the room temperature too much. It also suggests that some things are not fresh anymore, and it suggests stagnation, it suggests lack of creativity sometimes. And that's why, and not that this book is very gloomy, but it's a little bit maybe suggesting that it's too comfortable. Our online life is sometimes a little bit too comfortable, and this idea of course, because this deals a lot with the personal identity in the times of the digital age, and how we are able to cater everything to our personal identity and create our own identity without really taking the consequences of anything else, that we can just kind of cherry pick the concepts around us to create an identity, can be an illusion and can lead, obviously, and isn't maybe not for everybody. But still, I'm hoping that it's not too pessimistic. This one has not been translated yet, but there are some sample chapters that we can do a profile of, and I think it still has relevance to be translated. So that would be an interesting thing to look at someday. But and it's 3 years old. It's from 2017. In 2019, this I did this one, and this one is called Skjáskot, or Screenshot, and also like the cover of this is done by a Russian artist called Daria Sinovotnaya, and this is a continuation a little bit of the ideas in the first book. It's about our relationship with technology, and this is the focus on the screen that I already discussed a little bit before how we are just almost come to a standoff between human and the AI, or the artificial intelligence. I think like the biggest theme in this book would be AI. But I like to look at AI, or artificial intelligence, from a different perspective, because I think it's not only about computers getting more and more clever, and they're getting more and more human-like. I also think that artificial intelligence, if you kind of blow up the term, think about it from a bigger perspective, I think it's also about us humans being more conditioned to the digital world. We are also changing and needing the programs and the programming, the algorithms and everything midway. And I take an example here early on, just in the beginning of the book, just to lead you through this, about the idea of how we sometimes, when we enter a website or we download an app or something, we have to show that we are not a bot, that we are not a programmed or pre-programmed piece of machinery that is just trying to access that particular website or app. We have to prove that we're humans. That's what computers sometimes ask of us, because they're not too fond of computers imitating humans. So sometimes we have to prove that we're not humans. And a very common one is called "I'm not a bot" test, that we see all the time. We still see it. And when we go through "I'm not a bot" test, we have to go through a few loops. There's sometimes like these squares, and they contain different images. And we are supposed to check mark all the squares that contain traffic lights or something. If it has a traffic light, oh, this one does not have it. We check everything else. And then we end up checking a box that says, "I'm not a bot, I'm not a robot." And then we are allowed access to the website. And I think I've done this hundreds of times, but one time I was doing this, I felt when I got the access to the website after having ticked all these boxes to prove that I'm a human, I think I've never felt less like a human than at that point. That I've come completely conditioned to the ways of the machine. And I think this is just an introduction, maybe a wider idea of how we actually behave like this in so many ways. And even with very complex issues, like moral issues and very serious issues, I think we are maybe not even rising so much above the creeds and things that we criticize so much in organized religion. I think we are still very much beings and animals that are controlled by symbols, and we are not that far off from the coding of artificial intelligence. And one of the examples that I'm talking about more actually in this book is how social media obviously has been with all its positive aspects. It's also been it's also a tool that we can be manipulated by, and we sometimes feel like modern days are very, very fast and things are moving very fast, but we can actually take a lot of ideas from the past and try to mirror them to the present day. And I think that the invention of social media is not maybe so much more different than technological advancements that have to do with media in the past. Like when radio was first introduced, it happened very quickly from sort of the spark of the invention until until almost every household had a radio. It's not really a long time, maybe a couple of decades, and actually just less than a decade after it really started to take off. And radio brought us a lot of things. It brought us popular culture, a lot of freedom, pop music, rock music, and the rise of the individual, and ways for people and youth culture and people to express themselves, just like social media is doing. And I think the positive things that radio did are something that are still with us. But radio also brought us upheaval of fascism, nationalism, and just total political manipulation, especially in mainland Europe, just 10 years after the introduction of radio in Germany. They had the National Socialists already in power, and the same is in Italy, and they used radio. And it almost gives you chills how they used radio, because they used radio not with constant bombardment of propaganda, but peppering the propaganda, the hate speech and the hateful propaganda with entertainment all the time. And that's why we have to always be on the lookout when something is very, very interesting. And we also have to, things are very entertaining. Of course, they can be sedative to the general public, as we know. But not to be too pessimistic, and I think this is not. But this is what the English translation of Screenshot looks like. Done by Larissa, and I'm very happy with this translation. And my trusted publishing house, Forlagið, has already put this into print here in the Icelandic market, and of course it will be available soon. It's not completely out of print. This is just a prototype copy through my website, and we will give you the appropriate links. And also, perhaps it will be at some time available through American or international publishing house. I think I still have around 5 minutes left time to short meeting. I think what I'm about to read does not need much more introduction, because it's straight on the theme that I've been discussing, which is about this relationship between humans and the technology and the AI and this small sliver of screen that is separating us. And this particular chapter is called Pressure. My original idea with this book was to talk about the future, but looking over the chapters thus far, I've hardly talked about the future at all. This is, in fact, a book about the present, or to be even more precise, about the upheaval of the last 10 years, which are, of course, in the past. It was always my intention to dip into the last 10 years and use them as a good jumping off point into the future, but maybe it's enough to simply reach the jumping off point and then leave you to make your own predictions. At any rate, my plan has been to provide a bit of context, not to just keep adding more and more information about this or that technological innovation that is going to change society, but rather to provide a basic understanding of where we're at and what it all means. And who knows, maybe once I've done that, it will be possible to come up with some predictions. But what else have we talked about in this book? We talked about knocking old ideas off their pedestals and glorifying the everyday. We talked about the discrepancy between what we think and what we say publicly. We talked about the exceptional times we live in, about how we digitized vast parts of our life, even as we're still standing on firm ground on our own two meat feet. And this tug of war between the digital world and the meat world is nowhere more apparent than at the very spot where our fingers touches our smartphone screen. What would you say to the idea if you were to look back at the years since 2007 and think about what phenomenon has had the greatest impact? That it wouldn't be our smartphones themselves that would take the cake, but rather their glass screens, the touchscreen. Smart devices are just that, smart devices, connecting to the wisdom of the cosmos over Wi-Fi, no wires required. But how do we ourselves connect to our smart devices? That's the most important question. And the answer is that we connect to our devices with every tap and touch on our screens. The screen is what divides us from our devices, the final frontier. the last border. We've been staring at screens for a decade. It wasn't until the black turtleneck-wearing prophet told us to start touching our screens that this groping really took off. Of course, we used our fingers in our interactions with computers before this, to tap on our keyboards, for instance. But the touchscreens made it possible for us to stroke and poke and use our fingers' power to its fullest. And people really get off on this because our fingertips are packed with nerve endings and considered one of the most sensitive parts of our bodies. Running your fingers across a screen is a kind of revolution. Actually, it's more of a revolution than I've ever imagined. But maybe this shouldn't come as any surprise. People love touching, typing, tapping, and swiping. I think it's always been like this. A guy waving his finger all over the place while he talks is Homo sapiens at his very essence. Whether we're talking about an ancient Babylonian or a man sitting down to Sunday dinner with his family, it's just so satisfying to point at stuff while you're talking. It draws the attention away from yourself. But as pleasant as it might be to be the one doing the pointing, no one likes to be pointed at. The same applies to various other kinds of taps and pokes. It's my guess, for example, that a lot of folks who tap people on the shoulders as a way of getting their attention aren't all that into having the same thing done to them. Pointing, tapping, poking, these are all one-sided gestures. It's fine if you're doing it, but less so when you're the recipient. Or to put it in another way, fingers perform humankind's most selfish actions, those where the interests of the fingers are paramount. And yet, it's our fingers we've sent to tap on the door of the digital world. We decided to send our fingers to the last border. What a mistake! Why on earth would we choose our fingers, our most self-involved representatives, to be diplomats in our negotiations with the powers of evil on the other side of the screen? In so doing, we're really just sending our slimiest, snakiest wheeler dealers to carry our hearts into the world of the digital hacker black. And in truth, this doesn't seem strange to me, even if some hearts have gotten crushed along the way. Nor does it surprise me how much emphasis tech companies now put on the development of voice recognition software as our main form of communication with our smart devices. I personally don't like talking to computers and TV remotes, but my kids don't see anything particularly strange about it. And to be fair, using one's voices is a more natural form of communication than tapping on a screen. A person's voice has an almost soul-like quality to it. You can fall in love with a person based on nothing but their voice, but you're hardly going to fall in love with a person based on nothing but the way they tap you on the shoulder. Our technological interactions have been just that, one long tap on the shoulder, tapping, poking, pointing, accusations, thumbs up, middle fingers. Sometimes I feel like people have totally outsized ideas about their own importance, sitting huddled up over their phones, stroking the screens as if that's going to change the world. It reminds me of the first Jurassic Park movie, where the park owner, played by Richard Attenborough, the old guy with white beard, is so proud when he watches the dinosaur claw its way out of its egg in the laboratory. He gently strokes the egg and helps remove the shell. He genuinely thinks he has control over what's happening. Sorry if I'm ruining the most famous film of my generation for you, but spoiler alert, he has no control over any of it, and by the end, the dinosaurs are reproducing entirely according to the laws of nature. But that's how I felt 10 years ago when I got my first smartphone. I see now that I was just like Attenborough, sitting there stroking my screen, and to be honest, I'm probably still like this, arrogant as can be, tapping out a like here and a like there, congratulating myself for my comprehensive and just opinions about the issues that pop up on my screen. But in reality, I'm just watching a dinosaur hatch, and just like in Jurassic Park, there's no scientific possibility of having even a little control over the course of events. How could I claim otherwise? Does this tap on my screen have any actual value, or is it just a confirmation of my cold existence and desire for context? What hides behind or beyond the screen? How often do I have to tap on it in order to cross over to the other side? And just to conclude, collectively, humankind has been diligently tapping and poking at its screens for a total of 12 years. Remember, Steve Jobs just introduced the first iPhone in the January of 2007, so excuse me, 15 years now. And we've created a data heap with this endless prodding, an overflowing landfill that's overflowed its boundaries. We've pressed and compressed and applied pressure to our screens, and in doing so, we are on a daily basis taking a wardrobe and compressing it down into a little cube, devouring it in one bite, and then telling ourselves we've digested it. We've pressed our screens 1,000 billion times, hoping every time to find the truth, or at very least one more piece of the puzzle, so that finally we'll have the context we desire so much. But each and every tap merely blows a little more hot air into our mean balloons and create that much more pressure. And the keyword here is indeed pressure. Pressure, pressure. So what's the prophecy then? What happens if you start tapping on something breakable? Maybe nothing happens. Glass is hard. But what if you just can't get enough and so tap again and again and again and again and again? Sure, the glass can withstand it. But what if you're so into tapping on the glass that you get all your friends to tap on it with you, and they get all their friends, and then eventually almost every human being in the world is tapping on the glass again and again and again and again? What happens if you tap on something breakable? Well, it breaks. It's getting sweaty here. Because the lava lamp is already finally on here. We've got the lava flowing here. And that should conclude our time here. It's been a real pleasure joining you here from Reykjavik, Iceland. Again, many thanks to Marianne and Larissa for organizing this and for the support. And yeah, just a real pleasure. I sent my as much as possible my heart into the digital sphere here from this floating chamber here, like in the end and final scene of 2001: Space Odyssey. The baroque chamber with the moonlit floors. That's how I feel like in this pandemic times when we have all been off to the clouds. Thank you very much.